Well, I've now been joined by Janett Liriano, who is the co-founder and the CEO of MadeMan. Janett, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You've just done a keynote talk here at the World Retail Congress.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. The technology field at the moment, it feels like there are a zillion things all going on in parallel. When you look at each one of them, it's the new squeaky, newest, best thing. How do you cut through that clutter and understand actually what are the key things that we should concentrate on from a retail and consumer perspective?
Yeah, there's always a shiny new toy in terms of what's going to solve the challenge in the retail space, and cutting through the noise really requires an understanding of what's the foundational technology that's needed to make something work. So I'll pick three buzzwords: smart fabric and wearables, machine learning, computer vision, and blockchain, and then we'll talk about what I would, as an executive at a retail group, would be considering. For something like smart fabric, batteries is actually where most of the attention needs to be, and washability of the technology. Those are the two challenges that will really unlock its potential. So if we're chasing wearables without solving for those basic challenges, we're not really going to create a product that people are really going to want, which I think we saw when wearables were at the peak of their hype cycle. If we think about something like computer vision and machine learning and all the excitement around data, what's really important to consider is where are your data sets coming from, what's training the machine that's learning, and is it the right information? And that takes a long time to really determine what points are useful and what are not, and that requires time. So while there's a lot of focus and hype around those two technologies, there needs to be, a more reasonable approach to what's really needed first to make them really possible. And when you think about blockchain very quickly, it's the same thing. The power for powering such applications is pretty complex, and is the user interface and the user experience scalable and usable for retailers? So when we see something shiny, what we have to ask ourselves is what's underneath the shine, and is that ready? And if that's ready, then you can chase the sector.
Well, let's unpack some of those things. Let's talk about smart fabrics to start with. I don't know, it felt like 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago, smart fabrics, everyone was talking about it, and it was the newest thing. We were all going to be wearing stuff that integrated within the Internet of Things. That hasn't happened, so why, I suppose?
Yeah, so...
And what can we learn from that?
Yeah, and I spent many, many years working in that space, and I still do. The why comes back down to, a misunderstanding of power and what's required. So people were imagining a world where fabrics could change color, and your jacket could heat up at the drop of a hat, and, shoes that could track your every step. But nobody was really wondering what's going to power these devices and where are those batteries going to live. And when we were trying to build those technologies, there was a realization that the current components and things that exist were designed for things like computers and laptops, which never make it into a washing machine. So there's a real need at the industrial level to invest in redesigning a lot of those traditional technologies for a flexible application like smart fabric. So I think when retailers were trying to innovate by creating those products, you ended up getting this Frankenstein approach that wasn't really acceptable for the user. But that future is inevitable. It's just a matter of time.
And what's going to concentrate the time now in terms of when we will see those sort of smart fabrics more commercialised in your local high street?
I think that and as often happens, the tech industry will likely drive it first. There's a lot of talk that Apple's, secret mission now is to become a wearable company. And you kind of saw that with the Apple Watch and their recent filing of a lot of patents around the smart fabric space. But I think the retail industry has an opportunity to re-recognize itself as some of the first technology that humans ever made. And if retailers take that challenge and say, you know what, this is our space to really provide value, working closely with innovative startups and having more realistic expectations around ROI, there's an opportunity to capture that value within the next 5 to 10 years. I think that's when we'll really start to see meaningful applications largely centered around user comfort, things like heated jackets or shoes for diabetics. The function is really going to drive mass application. But retailers need to remember that our space is technical too, and be willing to take on that risk.
Now, let's focus a little bit on blockchain.
Sure.
Because, it's difficult to have a technological conversation anywhere at the moment without somebody mentioning blockchain.
Yeah, it's the beast of the hour. Yeah.
What are the practical applications of blockchain for retailers? Is it at the supply distribution end of the spectrum, or is it at the consumer end of the spectrum?
I think that really it's on both sides, but what I would say is most relevant and immediately useful is the implications on the supplier side. But there's a need to integrate with IoT, and I'll explain that in a little more detail. If you can imagine a world where your suppliers and your contract manufacturers all know when a certain amount of product is ready and automatically ship things on time because there's just this constant awareness of when things are being completed, or if you could verify that the cotton that you sourced is the cotton that you sourced and that it's the right staple length and all of those things. The blockchain really makes that possible if you have verified users providing this information and you have these contracts and transactions that allow things to happen. But the infrastructure that needs to be laid underneath that is not quite there yet. Blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum are public and really not that useful for enterprise level sorts of applications because companies will want that information to be private. And there's a fair amount of training that needs to happen at the supplier side to onboard them to any private blockchains that you may want to use so that their information is being included in that ecosystem. And I think if the retail industry sees blockchain as a collective effort instead of building in isolation and in silos, will really accelerate its scalability. But right now, all of our efforts are being fractured.
And who are going to be the big providers of blockchain technology? I mean, when you look at other parts of the tech industry, other parts of the tech industry that retailers interface with, there are usual suspects in those.
Yeah.
Who are the go-to people now for blockchain?
I definitely think what IBM is doing over with the Hyperledger and Fabric, which is within that ecosystem, is really interesting. They also are incubating a fair amount of startups that are focused on the retail sector, so I'd recommend looking into their efforts. Microsoft Azure is also doing a fair amount of interesting things on the private blockchain side. EOS and Blockstack on the public end of things really want to provide consumer-facing blockchain-based solutions for retailers, which is interesting as well, but a little further afield. I think early on, it's best to work with companies that are used to enterprise and are used to that level of scale. But there's a fair amount that's happening in the public space that's good to keep an eye on.
Well, we can't leave without talking a little bit about artificial intelligence.
AI, what an ethical problem.
So who does control the ethics of AI then?
There isn't a central group, right, that controls the ethics of AI, which really means that at the team level, we're hyper aware of who's at the table, right? And the mistakes can be small and embarrassing in terms of something not recognizing a human appropriately, or massively problematic like programming in bias. So while there's no central group that's organizing that, I think it's every retailer's responsibility to consider who should be at this table as we create or work to develop artificial intelligence, because our human intelligence is fraught with flaw. So anything that we build is going to have in our challenges there as well. So I think the key thing there is to know what you don't know and make sure that you surround yourself and that your team is filled with people that might be able to catch those blind spots. But it's an interesting journey, and I also think that's further afield than people think it is, but we're getting there. It's a process.
So looking into your crystal ball, which is
right,
probably
take it out.
Slightly more,
take a look.
Maybe accurate, or at least maybe has a more peripheral vision than most people's crystal ball.
My crystal
yes.
big orb. Yeah.
What do you see? How's it going to affect us as retailers
AI?
and consumers across the piece?
Across the piece. I really think, and I've said this before, that there will be no tech products. There will just be smart products, which I think is the exciting transformation the retail space can really take advantage of if they're aggressive about owning it, versus tech companies which are fast realizing that they will become obsolete, pushing into our sector. So I see a future where you walk outside and your clothes respond to the weather and your car drives itself and all the sensors know how you're doing, and a lot more. And to build that ecosystem, it's really a collaborative effort across industries.
Well, Janett, co-founder and the CEO of MadeMan, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.